Hello, and welcome to my monthly wrap up. So, how many books did I read this month? I read 47. So, I'll put some stats up above, but this is not accurate because one of the books that I read was not on Storygraph's database. So, therefore, I couldn't add it. But I read 47 books, which was around 15,000 pages. Out of those 47 books, 12 were DNFs. So, that's about a 25% DNF rate. So, I probably read around 35 in full. But like I said, that doesn't bother me, the DNF stuff, because that means I'm not wasting my time on books that I'm really not enjoying. So most of the books I read seem to be medium pace. I myself am a fast paced girly. I just want it to pop right out the gate. I want to get into it. So I do prefer fast paced myself, but most of them were medium pace. 300 to 500 pages was the most read, but I did read a couple of 500 plus page tomes. So my fiction and non-fiction percentage was 16 and 84, which is not normally it's about 80-20. So I did read less non-fictions this month in general, and that's just because I didn't find as many non-fictions about topics that interested me. The genres I did read from pretty much all genres, but the main bread and butter was fantasy, which is my wheelhouse, litfic, romance, mystery, and YA. Now, my rating for this month was a 3.31 average. So that's lower than I want. I'm really trying to hit that 3.5 sweet spot. So I might need to get a bit more, even more strict with my DNFs. Get that DNF up to 50%. But yeah, I would like to bump up the average by just generally reading books I like. I know that I'm a hard gal to please in terms of I don't award many 3 or 4 star books, but I'm a try. Okay, so let's briefly recap all the books that I've read this month. I'm going to work my way up from the bottom like I usually do. From the bottom, now we're here. So let's talk about the DNFs. So first up, we have My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. This was a translated fiction. It felt, like I said, really cold. The disconnect was there for me, which sometimes happens with translated works. It was a story about 2 girls growing up in a town during wartime. The town was really violent. People did nasty things to each other, to be honest. And it wasn't a fun read, and I wasn't enjoying it. So that's why I decided to DNF that one. Then I started Forget Me Not. I think I read 50% of this book. And it's about 2 teenage girls who are having a secret relationship and trying to get out of the town. And then one day one of them has an accident and gets amnesia. So they're both still high schoolers. And the issue with this for me was it was just too young. It was too juvenile. And it was giving me the ick because I just don't want to read about really young romances and high school problems. I'm just aged out of that. Clytemnestra. And this is a Greek mythology about Clytemnestra and her life and her sister Helen of Troy. This was pretty much same. For me to really enjoy Greek mythology, I either have to find retellings, I have to either find the writing to be phenomenal, or there has to be some sort of spin, some sort of nuance, new novel angle added to it. Otherwise, it's just you're reading the same thing over and over again. And this was just very much the same. It had a very heavy tone. It wasn't fun. I put it down. Then I read Forget Me Not by Julie Soto, and this was pretty cover. The guy is hot. That's what caught my attention. But this wedding planner, florist romance was gross. The dynamic between them was uncomfy. The sex scenes were very awkward and weird. I did not feel a connection between them whatsoever, and I really did not like the woman's character. She was very obnoxious and arrogant and rude. Then I started The Kind Worth Killing, and I DNF'd it very quick. As soon as the woman's POV came up and she was talking about having killed animals and people, I didn't like it. I don't like reading about animal killing. It's a very quick turn me right off scenario. I don't think almost ever pushed through it. It would have to be some weird dystopian thing where they're killing animals to survive or something. But yeah, just straight up murdering animals or animal cruelty or torture, I just don't like reading it. So the whole thing too with his wife cheating on him, I don't know, it was just not for me. It was not making me feel good reading it, so I'll put it down. Then I started The Master and Margarita. So this is a Russian work. I think it was written in the 1960s, but about 1930s Soviet Union. It was interesting premise, like the devil was walking around with a naked witch and a cat, and there were two people having discussions on whether or not Jesus existed. But it was a bit humorous, but overall I just couldn't get into it, and it was a very long book and it wasn't exciting, and I didn't really know how the flashbacks to Pontius Pilate was like relevant to the modern day bits, so I decided just to DNF it because it was giving 3-star vibes. Then there was Dark Water Daughter, and I listened to 50% of this one. Pirates on the seas, people with magic is the gist, but it was so boring. It was so slow paced, 50% of the way in and nothing really had happened. They were just still like going on the open seas, and it was very repetitive. The thoughts that were going through the female character's head were just the same ones over and over and again, and I got irritated and I thought, I'm not gonna persevere another 8 hours of listening to this. Then I read Speak, which was about a teenage girl who's been raped and finding her voice again after that. But it was done in first person, like stream of consciousness. And like I said, it did feel like a teenage girl's thought process, but once again, I just am not in that age range, and I found it too young. So this month was definitely the month that after these two books, Forget Me Not and Speak, I went through my TBR list and got rid of any non-fantasy YA. Then After She Wrote Him, so it's an author writing a character, but that character is writing about the author. Which one of them is real? Once again, read quite a bit of the way through, wasn't enjoying it. It would switch between the female author's POV and then the male character that she was writing, who's also an author's POV, without any change in grammar. So it would always continually just throw me about who was actually thinking and speaking at that time. And then when I read the end, a plot device is used that I'm just not a fan of, and I'm glad I DNF'd it. Then I started Elixir. So this was a non-fiction. I think this was just wrong time. It was very lyrical. The woman is talking about, I think it was a village in the Balkans or an area around there, and just she would talk about whatever caught her eye, like blueberries, and then talking about the blueberries in this region flowed into another story about the region, and it was very whimsical and dreamy and sort of like that, but it was just, I wasn't feeling it at that point in time. All the Little Bird Hearts, about a woman who seems to be on the spectrum with her daughter. Some neighbors move in who are very extroverted and sort of force themselves into her life. Once again, I just didn't connect to it whatsoever and found it dull, so I DNF'd it. And then we have Ghost Theatre, which was about a young girl who's part of this sort of bird order where they can use birds to divine and do auguration and stuff like that. And then she meets this sort of gender fluid, rakish dude who's part of a theatre, and this rushed into like an immediate relationship between them. Like it was not slow burn at all, but yet the book itself felt boring and slow paced. So that's why I DNF'd it. I'll talk about the unrated books now. So we have The Miracle Pill, which is a non-fiction book about pretty much move your body, like get up and move, even if it's just every hour you get up and move for 5 minutes. Something is better than nothing. Don't be sedentary. Then I read 101 Essays That Will Change the Way You Think. This felt like basically Instagram inspirational quotes just fleshed out a bit, but nothing phenomenal. So it wasn't for me. I wasn't the audience for this. Then I read the middle grade book, Hamlet Is Not Okay. My daughter likes to give me one of her books each month to have a read. I'm not a Shakespeare gal at all. I don't really like Shakespeare. And this book had a lot of Shakespeare in it. So it's based around the play of Hamlet. These two teenagers find themselves in the world of Hamlet. So there are a lot of direct quotes from Hamlet. And like I said, I don't like Shakespeare. So all of that was very boring for me. Then I read The Glass Castle. This is a memoir about a woman who had a wackadoo life. Like this woman's life, her childhood was extreme poverty, abuse, narcissistic parents, sexual assault, just everything. I kept having to remind myself that this is a memoir and not a work of literary fiction, because if it was, you'd be like, well, this author's gone over the top. They've put too much stuff in. But I'm like, no, this woman lived this life. Her and her siblings are true survivors, let me tell you. So I don't rate memoirs, but if I did, that one would have gotten a 4 stars. I read The Subtle Body Encyclopedia of like energetic practices. It's not an encyclopedia. It's an index of both Western information, like how your skeletal system works, what DNA is, what's epigenetics, stuff like that, laws of physics, that stuff, and then holistic alternative practices like traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and Reiki and all that sort of stuff. But it just touches on it briefly. Then I read The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, which was fine, but it's a topic that I've read a lot about, and this one didn't give me any new information, so it was just like an okay read. Then I read The Joy of Better Cooking, which was a cookbook, and yeah, I liked the cover. It drew my eye. It was something different. It was a pretty well laid out cookbook. I haven't made any of the recipes in it yet, but I did enjoy flipping through. And then I read The Empty Lunchbox. So look, any mother that's making these recipes for their kids, hats off, okay? But the amount of effort making, for instance, fried vegetable spring rolls from scratch for your kids' lunch that day, who is doing this? I don't know. So it didn't really give me anything. So now we've got my 2 stars. So there were no 1 stars. 2 stars, we have We Are the Song, which was a middle grade book about a world where some people have the ability to sing, and whatever they're singing about will happen. Like maybe they sing a song of nourishment and people around them are nourished because they're connected to a god. And then there's composers, people who write the songs that the singer sing. The girl was young. I think she was 12 or 14. I didn't like the story whatsoever. I didn't like how it ended. I didn't like the characters. I didn't like the plot. Nothing about it spoke to me, and I gave it 2 stars. Then there was Prosper's Demon, about a sociopath who can exorcise demons from people. Doesn't really care what happens to the person. Sometimes the people get killed taking the demon out. But then he meets a demon who's used their human host to do very many wonderful things, and he decides to let the demon stay there. Then I read How Not to Marry a Duke. Yes, it's garbage day. God damn it. And this was a 2 star for me. I didn't like the writing. It was very pedestrian. It was very heavy dialogued writing. The relationship was just, I don't know, forced and fast, and I didn't feel it, didn't connect to it. There was just nothing about this book that I liked, so I gave it a 2. And then I read Love Theoretically. This is the last Ellie Hazelwood book I will read. She's not an author for me. It's the same thing of big man, little woman, in STEM. This one had like incestuous uncles thrown in as well, and I just didn't like the relationship between these 2 people. The male interest was giving her a lot of shit about how she kind of is a chameleon and alters herself to reflect the people that she's with, and it just hit me the wrong way. So that was the 2 stars. And then we've got 2.5 stars with One Moment by Becky Hunter. I don't even really remember this book. I think it was about 2 friends. One of them dies, and then the other one tries to cope with the death and meets a new guy and falls in love. And the thing that I hated the most about this book was the ending, the choice that the dead friend made. No. Then we have in 2.75 category Pink Slime, which was a translated fiction. This month was also women in translation, so I did read quite a few books that were written by international women authors, and the works were translated. So this was one of those about a world where there is this pink algae in this town, and it causes these winds to come that pretty much make people so ill that their skin, I think, just falls off completely and they die. And some people have stayed in the town, and one of those people is the main character, and pretty much it's like she had the opportunity to leave and she chose not to, and I just don't understand her reasoning for it, and it was frustrating, and nothing really happens. The whole setup is just there's this slime and it affects this town in this way, and that's it. There's no other further dystopian sci-fi elements. It's just her going about her day. Then we have my 3-star category. So I had August Blue, and this was a very quiet book about a pianist who was adopted by another pianist, and they raised her to be a prodigy pretty much, and she ended up messing up one of her concerts, and she decided to take time off tutoring rich people's kids in music in various countries. So in the beginning it was lovely, the writing was beautiful, and seeing her time in Greece, it just was very evocative. But then once she gets back to London, it just got really boring. There's also this other storyline in there that she finds a doppelganger, and she's sort of trying to find this doppelganger, but it doesn't really go anywhere. So this is like all vibes, no plot. Then there's 12 Steps to a Long and Fulfilling Death. This was supposed to be darkly funny. There was zero humor in this. A woman dies, and then her ghost hangs around just trying to figure out how she died, who killed her. Didn't like anything about the book. Threads That Bind. I had a beautiful copy of this from one of my subscriptions. It's a YA retelling of the Morai, or the Greek fates, and all these kids that are basically demigods. Their lineage is from a particular god, and they'll have particular powers. But it was just okay. You know, 3 stars means like, yeah, it's fine, but there's just nothing amazing about it. And it's a book that I probably would forget very quickly. Then there was Sleepless, which is a nonfiction book about all the people in history who suffered with insomnia. So towards the end, it got really repetitive, just sort of having quotes from people from the past talking about their woes with not being able to sleep. So it got old. In the beginning, I really loved it, but then it got tired and boring, which is why I ended up being a 3. Then there was Wild by Cheryl Strayed. I put this in the 3, even though I don't really rate memoirs. For some reason, I rated this one. So I'm like, all right, if I rated it, I'll stick it in here. About a woman who hikes a PCT. By hike the PCT, she did parts of it, and then she didn't do parts of it. And this woman just, you know, likes to talk about sleeping with men and doing heroin. And I was just like, this isn't a very motivational book whatsoever. And that's what I thought it would be. And I was like, no, I don't like this woman and her life choices. Then I read The Inseparables by Simone de Beauvoir, about based on her real life friendship with a young girl when she was a child. So their childhood friendship over the years as they grew up. And it was very slice of lifey and kind of sweet. But yeah, it was just sort of a glimpse into her childhood, and it was fine. Then I read Yumi and the Painter and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. I don't know. I gave it 3 in the end because there were bits I liked, and there was just bits that was so boring and tedious. It did give me Studio Ghibli vibes in some areas, and that's, I guess, why I liked it. But if you go in there for the romance, because this is sort of touted as a romance, it's not. Go there for the romance. It does not really deliver very well on that part. But basically, you've got a woman who stacks stones in order to get spirits to come and light their houses or give them warmth. And then in another world, 'cause it's like 2 different worlds, you've got a painter. Their world is plagued by these nightmares that attack people while they're sleeping. And if he paints the nightmares into something else, it transforms them, and then their paths cross. It's a very complex book, but I gave it 3. Then there was Bewitched, which was pretty much just a sexy time romp with a witch and a centuries-old sorcerer that she freed from his tomb. And he believes her to be his wife, who was also the one who put him in the tomb. And things happen. It's a bit of silliness and a fun time. I'm not continuing with the series. I don't care enough about the plot and the characters, but it was enjoyable. And then in the 3.5 category, I had The Wolf and the Wildflower by Stacey Reid. So it's just a fun historical romance. In this one, you have a woman who was raised as a boy because the father wanted a son. The mother did not want to have any more children, so she made him believe that her daughter was their son. And the daughter kept up the ruse because she liked the freedoms of that being a man brought to her. And then the rest of the book is pretty much Tarzan and Jane. So you have a duke who got lost in the wilderness for like a decade on his own, no human contact, lived with a pack of wolves, comes back into society. She's sent there to try and like integrate him back because she's a psychologist. And it's me, Tarzan, you, Jane scenario. It was fun. You know, it wasn't amazing. It's one of my least favorite of the Stacey Reids I've read so far, but it was still a good time. And then The Naturals. So The Naturals was about a group of teenagers who were recruited by the FBI because they're naturals, they're natural profilers or they're natural liars, and they use them to sort of solve cold cases. And yeah, this was just too young for me, and it wasn't particularly clever. I like my thrillers and mysteries to have like intricately woven secrets that reveal themselves and how everything interconnects, and this wasn't the case. And I also don't like any thrillers or mysteries that involve murder and that have murder, but you have the killer's point of view. I don't want to read in the killer's point of view. I have found I like more cozy thrillers and murder mysteries that are not so gruesome, so no body horror, and also like nothing really too dark. You know, I don't want to read about like, oh, I'm loving slicing this woman up right now and hearing her scream. I don't like reading that. Then for 3.75, we have The Lighthouse Witches. So this was a sort of time travel jumpy book about a family who has lineage with witches that were burned in this place. All of the children sometimes go missing at one point or another, and these changelings come and take the children's places, and you're just trying to figure out what the heck is going on in this place. And it was pretty entertaining, so 3.75. And then I have Here Be Leviathans, which was a collection of short stories that were really weird and wacky. They pretty much personified items or animals. So all of these things become anthropomorphized. And my favorite story was about a group of Australian platypodes. I thought it was hilarious, who saved these German tourists from being eaten by crocodiles and who like to paint. So yeah, some of these stories are really entertaining, so 3.75. So then we've got 4 stars. And we have Chrysalis, which was a book about a woman who had a traumatic relationship and then physically, emotionally, completely changed her character, had a metamorphosis. But you look at her through the lens of 3 other characters. So you're never in that woman's point of view. So you look at her through 3 different people. Some of the people's POVs I didn't care for, but the mother's was just really hit me, the mother of this woman. And I loved it. So that's why I gave it a 4. Then we had A Witch in Time, which was very reminiscent to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Very. Even the demon is named Luke, same name. So you've got a woman who is a witch who is cursed to continually be reborn and have this very uneventful love romance with this guy, and then she dies an early tragic death. But the twist is that the demon that's in charge of overseeing this curse falls in love with her, and she with him, and how does it resolve? Some of her lifetimes I enjoyed, some I did not. Then we have My Husband, which was a translated work, and I really liked it. It was about a very unhinged woman who has a set of routines and things that she must do to be the perfect wife to her perfect husband, but her husband sometimes does things that upset her, and when he does, she must punish him accordingly. And she is a nut job, but it is entertaining to read. I didn't really care for the twist at the end. I didn't think it was necessary, but I enjoyed it. The Hanging City. So in this fantasy world, there are trolls, and a human who has the power to induce fear in people is running away from her father, who is using her as a weapon, and goes to seek refuge in the Trollus kingdom. She eventually falls in love with one of the Trollus and stuff happens. It was, yeah, I liked it. I'm not a big monster romance person if they're not human enough, and the way they were described reminded me of Shrek. But I sort of just overrode that in my head, and then I liked it, so I did enjoy it. Thornhead. So this was a really little mini novella about Sleeping Beauty, but with its own twist. Includes sad fairies and sweet nights, and I found it very bittersweet. Then we have The House of Roots and Ruin, which is the second in a series where you've got a family of all these sisters, half of whom have been killed off under weird and tragic circumstances. This is the younger sister's tale. She's commissioned to paint a portrait of this guy for this family. There's weird shit going on. It's very gothic. It involves plants and the language of flowers, and I enjoyed it. Then 4.25 is The Jasad Heir. So this one took me by surprise. It took, I think, 100 pages for me to get into it. Normally I would have DNF'd it by that stage, but because this was an Illumicrate edition copy, a fancy copy, I pushed through, and I'm actually glad I did, because I ended up giving it 4.25. It really turned around once the pacing picked up. I think for me, yeah, I can't stand slow pace unless I think, like I said, phenomenal writing, excellent characters, fantastic plot. Otherwise, slow pace kills a lot of books for me if it takes too long to get into. But in this world, you had a race called the Jasadi race, and they were people who could practice magic, and they were slaughtered. And you've got a woman who is the last Jasad heir. She was a princess of the royal family, and she survived. Some of her other members of their race have survived, and they've both got like fractions of rebellious groups that are trying to take back power. She gets involved with her mortal enemies. So basically the king's son, who was responsible for like slaughtering her whole kind. This is legitimate enemies to lovers, like the most enemies to lovers you're going to read. Like they are literally stabbing each other with daggers. You know what I mean? Like it was abusive in the beginning. I'm like, how am I going to ship these two when they are physically harming each other? They're vitriolic towards each other because they are actual enemies. They don't want to be around each other. In the end, I'm like, they need to bang. So they won me over, and I enjoyed it. Then we have 4.5 with To Poison a King. So this was quite a surprise about a young girl whose mother was the palace healer. She ends up deciding to kill the king, gets her 14-year-old daughter to deliver the poison. The king miraculously survives the poisoning but is severely harmed. The mother and father decide, well, we need to get out of here. You can take the fall for it. Because you're 14, maybe they'll show leniency on you, and they just yeet themselves out of there. But what happens is the queen doesn't suspect that family. She gets the daughter to try and heal the prince. Like, please do what you can. So her and the prince strike up a friendship. There is a 9-year age gap. She's 14 when she meets him, and they are obviously friends. It goes through all the way until she's 18, which I just felt like was not necessary. So that pacing really killed it. This could have been a 5-star read, but that in the beginning, all those years in that such a large time span was too much. And also, why did there have to be a 9-year gap? You know, why does there have to be a 9-year gap? But anyway, when she's 18, obviously feelings evolve and they fall in love with each other, but then shit happens and it's enemies to lovers, you know, but I liked it. And now we've got the 1 5-star. So out of all the books I read, there was only 1 5-star, and it was a middle grade book, and it was The Grace of Wild Things. And I freaking love this. It was such a cozy fantasy book about a young orphan who just wants to find a family, who just wants to be accepted for who she is. And I loved it. There were a lot of morally grey characters. So the witches in this book do cook children in ovens. They do that. So they're not, you know, sunshines and rainbows. Oh, it's, you know, they're just misunderstood. No, they do not shy away from causing harm to others. But I loved it. And there's familiars in this, and I cried tears at the end. So this really got me in the feels, and was an absolute delight to read. So really, really enjoyed it. And those are all the books that I read this month. So overall, like I said, it was actually a pretty decent reading. My 3.3 isn't a bad average for me. But I am hoping to once again like raise it. I'm just going to have to be a bit more strict with DNFs, because very few books that start out feeling like a 3-star progress. Like sometimes it does happen with the Jasad Air, for instance, and Poison the King. They were feeling like 3 stars in the beginning. Yeah, then there was obviously a lot of ones that were lower than 3 stars that I pushed through and should not have. So I just gotta try and hone it down a bit, because yeah, I do read a lot of books and I would rather a lot of them be really enjoyable. You know, I am capable of finding books I love, so just got to find those books. But that was everything this month. I hope that wherever you are having a gorgeous morning, afternoon, or evening. And as always, stay well, star child.